And welcome back. Many people are saying the criminal justice system is failing victims of sexual assault. The Women's Equal Justice Project is fighting to change that. Now, the project helps sexual assault survivors navigate the criminal justice system. Our next guest is a former sex crimes prosecutor and an expert in the fields of criminal justice and violence against women. Joining us now is the director of Women's Equal Justice Project, Jane Manning. And Jane, glad to have you.
Glad to be with you. Thanks, Daren.
So when we talk, I said in the beginning, like, look, when we talk about the criminal justice system really failing survivors of sexual assault, for a survivor of sexual assault, it can sometimes be a nightmare dealing with the criminal justice system. What are you seeing?
So we are seeing something that is part of the larger problem of how our criminal justice system operates and how very much it's in need of reform. So we're having an important social conversation about the ways that our justice system has tended to over prosecute and over incarcerate people for nonviolent crimes and crimes of poverty. And yet at the same time, our justice system has traditionally under investigated and under prosecuted issues of sexual assault. And those are the issues that my organization is taking on in collaboration with the survivors who come to us and who partner with us.
When you deal with survivors, obviously it's traumatic dealing with just the fact of sexual assault and knowing that a person has gone through these different things. It becomes even more traumatic sometimes having to navigate through the criminal justice system.
Yes.
What are you doing in terms of preparing people for what can be potentially a long haul?
Yeah, that's a great point, because many of the survivors who come to us have done what we say we want survivors to do. We say we want people to report sexual assault so that the perpetrators can be held accountable. And yet too often when survivors come forward, they're finding that they encounter a police detective who is overburdened with too many cases, who is not properly trained, who may not have the preparation to be able to do the right kind of investigation in these cases. And so survivors are finding that their cases are not being vigorously investigated or are not being skillfully investigated. And they're also finding that the system is just not allocating enough resources to cases of sexual assault, meaning right here, for example, in New York City, Daren. So the NYPD has over 35,000 police officers, and yet fewer than 200 of those, sorry, fewer than 300 of those 35,000 are assigned to investigate all cases of sexual assault and all cases of child abuse in all 5 boroughs of New York City, some of the most sensitive, demanding, complex, and high stakes cases. And what survivors right here in New York City are finding is that when they come forward to the police, they will often encounter a detective who just has too many cases to investigate, can't give their case the resources it needs. And what that leads to is exactly what you said. The fact that cases are dragging out, survivors are facing enormous delay before their cases are investigated. And often they never get a proper investigation. So what are we doing about that? So we partner with survivors to raise public awareness about how serious this problem is, to the extent that we can help each individual survivor get a better result on her case. We try to do that. We will speak with the police detective. We will speak with sergeants and other supervisors, try to get a better investigation. But at the end of the day, when we can't, survivors will often just say, I want the world to know how bad this is. I had no idea until it happened to me. And so we will work with survivors to meet with members of the New York City Council, with high-ranking members of the NYPD, to push for the idea that survivors deserved a properly staffed, properly trained, properly equipped special victims unit here in New York City, just like they do everywhere.
And when we talk about this, obviously seeing that the police department is severely undermanned, we talk about the criminal justice system and the fact that getting a case before a judge can really take a long time. What we haven't talked about is COVID. And when we talk about COVID, we understand that the court system in itself has had extreme backlog. A lot of people yet to hear a case. And if you've bought a case recently, it can take even a longer time. Talk to us about how you're navigating with your survivors and also the court system, given the fact that we know that there is this tremendous backlog.
You are so right about this. So what COVID meant for my survivors was the consequences were really severe. So in some of my cases, because we help survivors in many cities, not just New York City, but there were many cities where grand juries were closed for months or even close to a year, where so cases just piled up and couldn't even be presented to a grand jury, even when police and prosecutors, wanted to. And what that means is that in most cities, there's still a tremendous backlog of cases waiting to be presented to grand juries. What does that mean for what we want our public officials to do? It means we need them to prioritize. We need them to make principled decisions about which kinds of cases are the most important ones to push forward. And we are very strong in our belief that sexual assault should be among those absolute highest priority cases being pushed to the front of the line. Unfortunately, in too many cities, that's not happening. There is still just not enough pressure on our criminal justice officials to do a better job of prioritizing sexual assault. That's part of why I'm here speaking with you today, Daren, because this is a social justice issue. It's one we need people to be thinking about, to be asking our public officials about. There are things even that the people who are watching this show right now can do to make a difference.
Yeah. So for your organization, we know that you label yourself sometimes as being unique, right? Because the way that you handle and the way that you follow up with these survivors has been very, impactful for them, and also having a voice and somebody that can advocate for them. Talk to us about some of the changes that you're really advocating for, that you really want to see happen, that we can look to in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. So right here in New York City, we want Mayor Adams and we want our police commissioner, Keeshant Sewell, the first woman commissioner of the NYPD, and someone we have a lot of hopes for. We want them to make dramatic changes in the staffing and prioritizing of sexual assault in NYPD. The number of detectives assigned to the Special Victims Division needs to be at least doubled. And they also need to be staffed with detectives who are experienced and highly trained and really well prepared to investigate rape cases and other of the most serious cases. And that's not the case right now. So we want Mayor Adams, we want Commissioner Sewell to make a priority of repairing the NYPD Special Victims Division. And as I said, there's something even your viewers can do about that. If the mayor is at a public forum, if the mayor is on a radio call-in show, ask a question about sexual assault and say, what are you going to do to fix the way we handle sexual assault investigations in New York City? If he hears about it from his constituents, he's going to know it's important to us.
Yeah. And, interestingly enough, we know that the police department is undermanned in this particular area. And then to have the help of your agency and others who are really advocating for survivors. But there really aren't that many agencies out there that really are dealing with this particular issue of, a survivor and sexual assault and the trauma that's also brought with it. Talk to us about how you're able to actually even deal with the trauma factor, because a lot of those, in addition to needing that criminal justice support, need the help in the area of the trauma because they're overcoming these horrific experiences.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We really try to make a priority of speaking to our survivor partners about the importance of seeking out mental health and therapeutic support. Rape is a trauma that is, there are very few other traumas that compare to it. But professional mental health support and therapy can absolutely make a big difference. And so that's something we really encourage our survivors to do. And we will try to help them seek out and connect with those resources to the extent that we can. But I want to also take up something else you said, which is the issue of how we need more agencies to be dealing with this issue of the criminal justice under response to sexual assault. And I just want to mention one agency in particular that we are really hoping will take up this cause, and that is the United States Department of Justice. Because back in August, there were 20 rape survivors here in New York City who signed onto a letter to the United States Justice Department, asking them to come in and investigate the NYPD's under response to sexual assault, which is so severe and so pervasive that we really feel it deprives women and all sexual assault survivors of equal protection. So we have asked the Justice Department to do that, and we are waiting to see if they will. We think there are very few social justice issues and civil rights issues that the Justice Department could weigh in on that would be more important than this one.
Can you take us behind closed doors a little bit when we talk about survivors and some of the things that they have to deal with? Because I think so many times we think, okay, you make your allegation, you take it before court, the court does what it does, and boom, it's over. And it's not. It's a life experience, and it's a long experience. But walk us through the life of a survivor from the moment they enter into your doors to walking them all the way through this process.
Yeah, the answer to that question is going to look different depending on what county that survivor is in, what police department they're dealing with, and what DA's office they're dealing with. Because what we know is that there are some district attorneys who do a really good job of prioritizing sexual assault, and there are some, far too many actually, who do not. So where we find a receptive police department or district attorney's office, we will really try to partner with that office and try to make sure that they are aware of the best, most up-to-date techniques for investigating drug-facilitated sexual assault, for example, or other best practices that we want to make sure they're aware of. Then there are other cases where the survivor is really not getting a good response from police and prosecutors. And what we will do in that case is we will really try to help her keep pounding on those doors, making the phone calls, trying to reach higher up the chain of communication to someone in that office who can intervene and push for something better to happen in that case. I will tell you that those cases where survivors get a good response from police or prosecutors, it can be an enormously empowering experience. I don't want people to hear this interview and say, oh, forget it, I'm never going to report. Because the
Right.
truth is that if you can work with an advocate, and if you can get a good prosecutor, a good detective assigned to your case, and hold that person accountable, then you have that satisfaction of knowing that you may have protected someone else from the thing that happened to you. And that can be an incredibly empowering and healing experience.
Jane, you kind of leaned into my next question because I wanted you to address people who are out there watching right now, because you may have, it may be yourself, it may be a loved one, it may be a family member that you know that has been a survivor of sexual assault and knows that they want to do something about it. What would you tell people in terms of first steps? How to really just break out from the experience to getting help for the experience?
Yeah, so a few things. So one is, the sooner you report, the better, even if you're not sure that you want to go forward with a criminal case. It's a great idea to report it, because then there's a record of you making that report. And in the vast, to my knowledge, if a survivor backs out and says, you know what, I don't want to go forward with a prosecution, police and prosecutors will defer to that. So you're not going to find yourself in a situation where you're sort of trapped into going forward. There will always be that exit ramp. But if you report at an early stage, then the fact that report is there is just going to, it's going to strengthen your case and preserve your options. The other thing that I would tell people is, even if you're not sure that you want to go to the police, you're not ready to go to the police, go to the hospital after an assault or a suspected assault, and get that rape kit done, because then that evidence is preserved. And that little window of time after an assault is your only chance to preserve that evidence. But once it's preserved, it's there, and it can be retrieved if and when you decide you want to go forward with a case. And having that evidence can make all the difference between having a viable case and not. So I do want to encourage people, absolutely, even if you don't think you want to go to the police, go to the hospital and get that rape kit. And then if you do decide you want to report to the police, it's a great idea to have an advocate with you. It's a great idea to call a rape crisis center, or to speak to someone at the hospital and say, can you assign a hospital advocate to be with me when I report to the police? Or the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault. All of these organizations are really good places to find an advocate who can assist you through the process of reporting to the police. And it's a great idea to have somebody with you when you do that.
Yeah. When we talk about your work, obviously, it's a lifelong passion of yours, and you're very passionate about making sure that survivors are heard and also taken care of, and those who are the perpetrators to be held accountable. When you look at some of the barriers that you're facing right now, what would you say is the biggest barrier that you're facing in this moment?
The biggest barrier is that too many of our prosecutors and our police officials have never felt a sense of public pressure to do better in the area of sexual assault. And when they don't feel the public pressure to do better, they don't do better. And the good news about that, Daren, is that it's in our power to change that. All of us, as citizens or residents of a democracy, have the power to ask questions of our public officials and make demands of our public officials, and to raise our voices and say, we can do better and we must do better. And you will not have my vote unless you do better, and hold them to it.
Yeah, it's pretty important that I think that we get the word out and that people actually raise their voice. Are you finding more and more people joining the cause of raising their voice and becoming public advocates, if you will, in this particular area?
I'm so happy that you asked that. So what I am finding is that more and more survivors are willing to speak out about their unjust experiences with criminal justice. And I am finding that more and more journalists are, like you, are doing a great job of raising attention to the issue. Um, here's where I'm still seeing the disconnect, though. I think a lot of us out here in the public don't realize that it doesn't have to be that way. I think there's a feeling out there that, like, oh, the criminal justice system just is so broken, it can't be fixed, it can't do better. And the thing I most want people to take away from this conversation is that that is just absolutely not true. So police and prosecutors figure out how to do a good job at the things that we tell them are important, but not enough of us have told them that they've got to do better on sexual assault. When prosecutors put their minds to it and hire the best ADAs and bring in the best expert witnesses, these cases can be prosecuted very skillfully and very successfully, and we can hold perpetrators accountable and prevent future assaults. So I don't want people to give up hope and say, oh, forget it, criminal justice is just broken, there's nothing we can do. It's absolutely not true. If we engage in this issue and we speak up more about it and demand change and improvement is possible.
All righty. Jane Manning, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with the Women's Equal Justice Project, I should say. I won't say Women's Justice, Women's Equal Justice Project. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and being a voice for the voiceless. Appreciate having you here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you so much, Daren.
All righty. Thank you, Jane. And listen, we want you to stay with us. We do have a little bit more show coming up, so the Social Justice Forums will continue after we take a quick break.